So I'm back in my project here, and I'm going to go to my scripts folder, and right down here. And I've got two scripts that I'm interested in, but I'm going to open up first off the player input script. Let that open there. Give this a second. I forgot to have Visual Studio already open. All right. Does that look readable? That looks readable. There we go. So the player input script, like I said, it's all commented, right? So you can see what the script does. You can see what every single line of this code does. So you never have to worry about what is something doing. So basically, we are going to define the names of our input axes, so vertical, horizontal, and break, right? That's what we're just checking our inputs for from the player. All right, and then we are going to have some public variables called thruster, rudder, and is braking. All the other classes are going to say, hey, player input, are you applying a thruster? Are you applying a rudder? Are you trying to brake? We don't want these to be directly editable through the inspector of Unity, so I just have a little tag here, hide in inspector. So even though it is public, you won't see it in the inspector in Unity, which is cool because I don't want people messing around with those. The code is going to handle those. They need to be public, but we don't want to be able to see it. Inside our update, first and foremost, it's good to have a way to leave the game. A lot of times people will make a build of this, they'll run it full screen, and then they say, well, how do I exit? Oh no, now I've got to force quit the game or whatever, and they have no way to get out. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to say, hey, if ever you press the cancel button, which is the escape key by default, and you're not in the editor, means this is an actual build, then let's quit the game, which is important, so you can actually leave. Here we have some code that's asking about a game manager. Now we don't have a game manager yet, so this code isn't going to do anything, but eventually it's going to say, if we have a game manager and the game has not started, then we have no inputs. That way the player can't drive while the game manager is initializing or the cutscene is going or anything like that. All right. Finally, all we're doing is we're just getting the thruster, rudder, and braking from our input system by saying, hey, input, give me the values of these axes and buttons. All right. The other script I'm interested in is the vehicle movement script. This is the most complex script by a lot in this entire project. All right. This is where all of that physics stuff we just talked about is contained. Okay, so you may have some questions about it, but again, it is all commented. There's going to be nothing secret in here about what I'm doing or what's happening. This is all based off the real code from the actual game. It's simplified quite a bit, but it's all how this game is actually run and how these ships move. And the team has done, the Cybernetic Walrus team has done a fantastic job building a game that's compelling to play, and then we just spent time just kind of simplifying it and making it a little bit more human readable for these training day. So fantastic stuff. So the ship will always have a reference to its speed. That's just how fast it's going in the forward direction. The speed is how fast forward it's going, ignoring any velocity from hovering or sideways or collisions or whatever. We have some drive settings, which is just how much force does our engine apply. And we have our braking factors. So we'll see here like slowing velocity factor, braking velocity factor. What this says is if we don't press the thruster, if we just let go of all controls, we are going to maintain 99% of our velocity every frame. Every frame we're going to lose 1% of our velocity. We're just going to start slowing down. All right? If we apply our brake, we're going to lose 5% of our velocity. Straight off our velocity, just 5% reduction, right? So our brake is going to stop us much faster than if we just let go of the controls. Angle of roll is just how that ship is going to bank. The hover height is how high we want to be. Max ground distance is how far we're going to look for the ground. And then we've got our hover force. And we're going to use something called a layer mask to define what is the ground. How do we know if the thing underneath our ship is the ground, is the wall, is another player? We don't want to be able to hover off the top of another player and fly over a wall, right? We're only looking for what we consider to be the ground. And so we've defined a layer mask that's going to say this is the ground. Anything on this layer is the ground. And then here's that PID controller I talked about. Again, it's not super important to know how it works. It's kind of black box. It's just a concept. We're going to say hover PID. This is where I am. This is where I want to be. How much force should I apply? And it's going to give us a number. Right? It's kind of a magic 8-ball sort of thing. Set our physics settings. We're just going to define a terminal velocity of 100 meters per second. And then what's our hover gravity versus our falling gravity. All right, so then basically the meat of this script is that inside fixed update being like regular update, except this is where we apply our physics. All physics calculations should be done inside fixed update. We're going to calculate our speed. And it's not super important for you to understand dot products and stuff like that for vectors, but suffice to say, we just want to say, hey, velocity, how much of you is forward? And it's going to give us a number. Cool. It's basically just figuring out some percentage amount for us. How much of our velocity is in the forward direction, and that's our speed. We're going to calculate our hover and our propulsion, which is going to be simply in hover. We're going to say, all right, let's generate an array, an imaginary line straight down. And we're going to say, hey, physics, shoot out that ray for me and tell me, did I hit anything on the ground layer that's within my max distance? If it says yeah, then I'm on the ground. If I'm on the ground, I'm going to say, okay, well, tell me the angle of the ground, the normal of the ground. Tell me how much force I'm going to apply upward to hover based on how far away I am. All right, and then we're going to just calculate and add some hover force up and some gravity down. Right, that's the force up is going to push us away, the gravity down is going to push us back towards, and those two forces are constantly fighting each other. Hover wants to lift us away from the ground, gravity wants to bring us right back down, and that's what gives us our nice central amount there. If we're not on the ground, then ground is just pointing up, and we don't apply any hover force, we just apply a strict gravity straight down. The code after that is just the code that aligns our ship to the ground and handles our banking cosmetic, which is based off of our rudder here. Again, I don't want to get into a lot of the math parts of this, it's all commented, but basically this is just what tracks us to the ground.
You don't want to explain quaternions?
I don't want to explain quaternions, and right now I don't particularly want to explain projecting on planes either. Suffice to say, we're going to say the ground points this way, I want to point this way, and that's what we do. And we make our ship do that. So yeah. And no one really wants to explain quaternions, I don't think. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to calculate our propulsion. And to do that, first thing we're going to calculate, all right, how much rudder are we applying? So we'll calculate some torque, and we'll apply the torque, and that's just what turns our ship, or yaws our ship. We're going to calculate our sideways speed, very much like we did the forward speed. Again, there's that dot product. We're going to say, hey, velocity, how much of you is in the right direction, directly to the right of our ship? That'll tell us how much is sideways. And we'll apply a perfect friction. So this is where I have this little note. If you want to add drifting to the game, all right, so here's our perfect friction, our side speed divided by time.fixed delta time. If you were to, say, further divide that by 4, then all of a sudden you would be sliding all over the place. Now, I don't want to do that, but you could. Right there is where you can add some Tokyo drift if you really want it. So then basically we're going to slow down our vehicle if we're not applying thruster. If we are on the ground, we're going to apply some brake if we hit the brake key. You can't brake in midair. You can only brake when you're on the ground. I don't know why, but it's just how it is, so whatever. So we brake while we're on the ground. And then for propulsion, also only applied when we're on the ground. We're just basically going to say our drive force times our thruster, minus, and here's that drag. This is the drag that continues to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And so as we get faster and faster until eventually it caps out at our terminal velocity. When we collide with something, we're going to say, hey, did we collide with a wall? If we collided with a wall, we're going to say, oh, here's that dot product again. This one becomes important. Hey, collision impulse, how much, collision force, how much of you is up? All right, and then we're just going to say, okay, we'll take that and we'll apply the negative version of upward force from collision. So upward force from collision says we're going up, and we're saying, nope, we're coming down with the exact equal amount. We're not pushing into the ground, we're just adding enough to completely neutralize the collision and keep us on the track. And then we have some other get speed percentage, which we'll use later. Okay, so that's all this code. Again, all fully commented. If you really want to dig into it, feel free, be my guest, all that stuff. If you have questions, definitely ask them. But actually applying these to the ship is relatively simple. So I've got my ship, and I'm going to come down here to where it says player input script. By the way, it can be difficult to read the names of these scripts if they tend to be longer. So you could come down to the bottom of the project view and just drag this slider here, which just makes the icons smaller or turns them into a list, or makes them bigger or whatever, or a flowchart over there. I'll just make them bigger. That works for me. And I'm going to locate the player input script, and I'm just going to drag it right onto my ship. And note that I don't need to make any changes. I've just defaulted it to the input axes we have. If for any reason you were to define different input axes or want to change the names, you would just change them here. And you might be wondering, well, where are these input axes? Like, we might be familiar with vertical and horizontal, but is anyone familiar with a built-in input axis named brake? Probably not. And so those are already set up here. If I go to Edit, and then Project Settings, I shouldn't have zoomed in when doing this, and then Input, you'll see over here in the Input Manager, under Axes, I've set up some axes. Begin game controls, end game controls, so you can see exactly where all of our game-specific stuff is located. So if you weren't able to find it, there it is. We have our normal horizontal input axis, but I also supplied a second one that makes this work with joysticks. So if you have a controller you want to play this game, it will work right out of the box. All right, again, that's our horizontal, vertical, I have both the keyboard and the joystick. And for brake, I have both the keyboard and the joystick. So we can play with either keyboard controls or with a game controller if we have one, right? And all that is just me just typing in the values there ahead of time. So that's our input. So now I want to handle the movement. So again, I'm just going to grab my vehicle movement script, just drag it into the inspector of my ship, and it's going to have all these default values I set up. The ones I need to set up here is, first off, what is ground? Well, what does that mean? So if I look at my track, if I look at the road collider, I will see that the road collider is on a layer called ground. There's actually quite a few of these layers. All right, I could put it on post-processing or wall or UI or water or whatever, but it's on ground. So if I click on this ship and the ship says, okay, well, what is ground? The layer mask lets me click and say, oh, I can select anything I want to be ground. Well, I want the ground to be ground. Yeah, sure. Maybe I wanted water to be ground. I don't have any water, but I could. I want everything to be ground. Would be a terrible idea because then you would just drive right over walls. So don't do that. But I'm going to say ground is ground. And then it's going to say, okay, where's my ship body? So the ship body is not the ship itself, but again, the ship body, because it wants to turn the body even more to make for that banking action. Right? The ship itself is just turning. The body of it, the graphical parts are going to be banking, right? Rotating even more. And so I could click and drag that over onto that property, or much easier is just, I'm going to click this little circle selector here. It's going to pop up with every game object that's in my scene, and I'm just going to type ship and then ship body right there. All right. And so now I'll save my scene. I'm going to hit play. And granted, the camera's not set up yet, but a ship is there. It's floating, see? And if I go to my game, right, again, it's kind of hard to see. Maybe zoom in a little bit. There it is. And I'll just, don't worry, we'll get the camera set up here shortly.
This is the difficult mode. You have to race the whole track.
Nightmare mode, yes.
Although, how many times have you played it? You could probably do it by memory.
I highly doubt I could do this from memory. It's just like, bye guys, crash, crash, crash. I'm hitting every wall I can find. There you go. In the next step, we'll talk about the cameras and we'll make all that a lot better. But at this point, I have a fully functioning, physically driven car with custom gravity and collision forces and braking and all this really cool stuff, all the really complex stuff that goes into the physics of a racing game. All right. So this was a lot of talking on my part, but it's a fairly easy step. What you're going to do is with the ship selected, you're just going to add these two scripts. So you can go to your scripts folder and drag them onto your ship, or another way you can do this, if you don't want to drag from your project view onto the inspector, you could always click Add Component, go to Scripts, and that lists every script that's in your project, and then you could just add them through here. And so what you want to do is you want to add the player input script, which is going to require no changes, and then you're also going to add the vehicle movement script. Now the vehicle movement script, you'll want to change the what is ground to be the ground layer. And you'll also want to change the ship body. You'll just click the circle selector here, and you can just type in the search bar ship and then select ship body. If you really want to play around with the PID tuning, you can certainly do that, but I warn you, if you mess around with this too much, the ship might start bouncing all over the place. Those PID things tend to just need a little bit of tuning. And so there you go. And then when you're done, you can hit save your scene, and you can just come on up here to the top, hit play, and then while you're in play mode, WASD will just let you sort of fly around there. Shift is brake, and you can just drive around for now. So it came to my attention that some people don't have a ground layer, which may have just been something that happened importing with a different version or whatever. So I'm going to take a quick second here, and I'm just going to tell you how you can get that back. So what I'm going to do, and you guys can just follow along on this part if you don't have the ground layer. I'm going to go up here to the top of my inspector, or my editor where it says Layers, and I'm going to click the drop down here, and you're going to see that I have a couple layers that I will be using today. These are post-processing, ground, and wall, and you probably are missing those. So what you're going to do is you're going to go down to the bottom and just click Edit Layers. There you go. And I'm going to expand the Layers section, and you'll just want to type these in. Now the names aren't super important because we'll just be identifying these directly, but you're going to need these three layers: post-processing, ground, and wall. All right, so, and you can add the other ones as they become relevant later, but these are the ones we want. Right now, really ground and wall are the super important ones. But post-processing, ground, and wall. Now, once you add those, it just becomes a point of adding stuff to those layers. So I want to click on my ground here. So if I go to my environment, and I go to my sand floor, I want to make sure my sand floor is on the ground layer so my ship will hover and drive. Right? It'll detect that that is the ground. I want to do the same thing for the road. So if I expand my track and go to my road collider, that is also the ground. Finally, you'll want to click on the wall colliders and make sure those are just on the wall layer. So sorry that happened. It shouldn't have, but I guess just importing stuff, whatever, you lost the layers there. And so again, the sand floor, this piece of terrain here that is the floor, needs to be on the ground layer. The ground collider of the track, or road collider of the track, needs to be on the ground layer. And then finally, the wall colliders need to be on the wall layer. Those are what you need for the physics to work correctly, so the ship knows what is a ground and what is a wall. All right, we have identified the problem with the layers and the inputs for those of you who have that. And this is my fault for not explaining how we're going to open this project. So if at the beginning of the day, you went to the files and you went into, say, like the project, you went into assets, and you went into scenes, and you just opened up one of these scenes, what effectively happened is it created a project and loaded all these assets in for you, but it lost all of the project settings, right? The things that were part of this project. And that was my fault. I really should have done that step as well. So you're going to go to, let me just click that again. You're going to go to File and then Open Project, and then Open. And under the training day files, I believe you're just called Hover Racer, you're just going to click on the folder, Hover Racer. Underneath you should see assets and project files and stuff like that. And you're just going to, again, just click on the Hover Racer folder and hit Select Folder. That opens the whole folder as a complete project with all of the settings and everything else. Then you'll have all your layers, you'll have all your inputs. I do apologize for not doing that step. So if you just started by opening the scene and everything up until now seemed like it was perfect, you were missing the layers, you were missing the other stuff, and that should get you squared away. If you lost work or you moved stuff into your own project or whatever, again, you can always go into the scenes folder, the completed folder, and just, if you open up the 04 building the vehicle and open the scene, you will be exactly where we are right now.